In 1824, the single-party dominance of the era of good feelings collapsed. Working-class Americans watched as a disputed presidential election was decided by closed-door deals in the House of Representatives, handing the presidency to John Quincy Adams. Voters called it the corrupt bargain, a sign that the government had become a closed loop controlled by wealthy Eastern elites. Andrew Jackson stood as the antithesis of those Washington aristocrats. He was born into extreme poverty in a remote settlement along the Carolina frontier. His childhood was defined by the brutality of the American Revolution. By the time he was 14, his father, mother, and 2 brothers were dead, and Jackson himself was a prisoner of war, captured by the British at just 13 years old. While in captivity, a British officer ordered the boy to shine his boots. When Jackson refused, the officers slashed him across the head and hand with a sword, leaving physical and psychological scars that never faded. Jackson channeled that early trauma into a relentless drive. He taught himself the law, built a fortune as a cotton planter in Tennessee, and gained national fame as a victorious military commander in the War of 1812. When he ran for president in 1828, the campaign was the first to mobilize the masses. Voting participation skyrocketed, but the race devolved into vicious personal attacks. Opponents branded Jackson a murderer and targeted his wife, Rachel, accusing her of bigamy. Just weeks after his victory, Rachel suffered a heart attack and died. Jackson buried her, convinced that the stress from his political enemies had killed her. Jackson entered the White House as a grieving, battle-scarred widower. He arrived with one objective: to dismantle the power of the entrenched establishment and hand it to the nation's farmers and mechanics. To execute that vision, Jackson asserted a new theory of executive power. He argued that because every member of Congress only represented a specific regional faction, the president was the only official elected to represent the entire population. He aimed this newly defined power directly at the institution he saw as the ultimate symbol of the aristocracy, the Second Bank of the United States. Jackson and his base viewed the central bank as an unconstitutional monopoly. Congressmen were receiving generous loans from the bank, and Jackson believed it was a corrupt machine designed to consolidate wealth among northern elites while ignoring the economic needs of common Americans. Previous presidents had used the veto only when they believed a bill explicitly violated the Constitution. Jackson broke that precedent. He vetoed the bank's charter based on political and economic disagreements, establishing the president's right to strike down any legislation he felt harmed the public. With the bank's destruction, the executive moved beyond its role as a passive administrator for Congress. The president now acted as the primary driver of national policy. Jackson applied this same aggressive authority to the map of the United States. He believed that acquiring new territory was synonymous with extending the area of freedom. Throughout his career, he focused on securing the young nation's borders against European powers and opening vast tracts of land for white settlement. This drive for expansion culminated in the Indian Removal Act of 1830. In theory, the act authorized the federal government to negotiate removal treaties. In practice, Jackson's administration used the legislation to justify exerting massive, sustained pressure on Native American tribes to abandon ancestral homelands. The resulting forced relocations brought massive loss of life. Yet to Jackson's base, these policies were viewed as a necessary step in securing a prosperous and sovereign American empire. That sovereignty soon faced an internal threat: the nullification crisis. In 1832, South Carolina declared federal tariff laws null and void within its borders. The state's leaders threatened that if the federal government tried to enforce the taxes, South Carolina would secede from the United States. Jackson was a Southern plantation owner and an advocate for states' rights, but he viewed the prospect of a state leaving the Union as an absolute betrayal of the Republic. He responded to this with overwhelming hostility, issuing a public proclamation stating that disunion by armed force is treason. He secured authorization from Congress to send the federal military into South Carolina and threatened to hang the lawmakers driving the crisis. Faced with the guarantee of a military invasion, South Carolina backed down. Jackson's show of force established that the federal union was indivisible, effectively delaying the outbreak of the Civil War for another 30 years. When Jackson left office in 1837, the aristocratic rules of the early government had been dismantled. To support his agenda, his allies built an extensive network of campaign committees and partisan newspapers. This organization birthed the Democratic Party and established the disciplined, mass-mobilized two-party system that still dominates American politics. His legacy remains contradictory. He was an unwavering defender of the federal union and a champion of the poor, yet he built his own life around an immense personal fortune and the enslavement of over 100 people on his Tennessee plantation. His tenure left the executive branch with enough power to challenge Congress and the Supreme Court. The office he handed to his successor bore little resemblance to the one he inherited. By sheer force of will, Andrew Jackson took a system originally designed by and for a small circle of elites and forced it open. He ensured that the American presidency would answer directly to the voting public.